Hello, I'm Elaine Sanchez, founder of Caregiver Help, and I am back with Tim Rocak, and we are talking about supporting families and family members with disabilities. Tim, this has been such a wonderful series, and I'm so appreciative of all of the knowledge that you have shared and the ideas and strategies for helping a child from birth into adulthood manage the challenges of living with a developmental disability. So this has been a very rich conversation, and I'm eager now to talk about planning for and with an adult child with developmental disability. So we've talked about how you can stay in high school longer, how a child can get job training and living skills as they go into you said from age 16 they go into this new program then about living independently. So now let's say that we've gone through this, they're now 21, they are out of school, and as you said, hopefully with a resume. So let's pick it up there. And do we want to start with what is next in terms of a career, or do we want to talk about hopes and dreams first?
I'd like to start with hopes and dreams.
Okay.
Thank you for that. And thank you for
Yes.
that nice introduction, Elaine. Um, One of the things that I hear parents of kids with a disability talk about is when you're pregnant, you're thinking about what's going to come and you're excited and happy. And then you have a baby and then you deal with the reality of having a baby and all that. But all families, all parents have hopes and dreams for their child
Mm-hmm.
and eventually the child for themselves. One of the things that families talk about is how once they find that their child has a disability, how hard it is for them, and they grieve for their hopes and
Yes.
dreams.
Yes.
And it's certainly understandable. And as you know, there are stages of grief that you may go through for different reasons with different situations. But hopefully, eventually, those families move through that to a place where they see their child as they are and they have new hopes and dreams.
Okay.
And I'm here to say they don't all go away.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but hopefully, you've been with your child long enough that you have an understanding of their hopes and dreams for themselves as well.
Mm-hmm.
And they might be different than you thought, but they can still be great.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I think is significant that also is you have a lifelong interest in your child, and as opposed to a child who's expected to become independent without a disability, your responsibility doesn't go away when they become 21 years of age. And so that's definitely different for family members of a child with disabilities. Um, but I think leading up to that, you can play a positive role, and you have to decide who's in charge of those hopes and dreams.
Oh.
Is it you, or is it your child, or is it a combination? Is it your husband or the sibling? Um, Part of being an adult is you have your own hopes and dreams,
Mm-hmm.
and you have the authority, if you will, to act on those. Whether you're mature enough to do it or not, you still have the authority. At 22, I didn't know much of anything, but I got to make my own mistakes and I
Right.
got to learn from them. And then I got to do something different based on that. And I think that's what we want for our children with disabilities as well. And so hopefully you've begun a process with them where you're transferring that responsibility and that opportunity and the excitement that comes with it becomes your child's. So certainly you're going to be an important person in their life, but
Mm-hmm.
at the point where they're starting to move to adulthood, hopefully you have transferred a lot of that decision making and a lot of that dreaming to them.
Oh, that's wonderful. Do you have any tips for parents of children with disabilities for helping them imagine what their life can be and for creating hopes and dreams.
Yeah, I think I come back to giving them concrete experiences.
Uh-huh.
Uh, we used to do things where we would survey people with disabilities, and we would ask them questions, and the answers sometimes were helpful and sometimes they didn't seem to make any sense. And then I
Mm-hmm.
figured out, or our field figured out, that we're asking questions that they can't possibly know about. So if you have a cognitive disability, one of the forms that takes is sometimes your ability to abstract or draw abstract
Mm-hmm.
knowledge is
Mm-hmm.
difficult because you're cognitively more concrete than that. So if I
Mm-hmm.
talk to you about becoming an engineer, if you're 22-year-old Tim Rocak, you still don't really have a good idea what that looks like. But if you're 22-year-old Tim Rocak with a cognitive disability, you probably don't even know what we're talking about. And
Right.
so, whatever you can do to give your child a rich palette of experiences,
Mm-hmm.
and anything from talking to them about what your work looks like or what your dad's, but then talking language is an abstraction as well, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so, if you can help them get into different situations, maybe volunteer, maybe a work experience, maybe just visiting a workplace or asking for a tour, it'll be a little easier for them to understand what's available to them.
Uh-huh. So when you helped, Garten Services helped kids through the summer employment program, can you share with us some of the types of jobs that they did?
Sure. Um, I think I'm going to go beyond that because that would be too limiting because we only
Okay.
had so many kids and so many employers that we worked with. But
Okay.
I've helped people with disabilities work. We placed a gentleman that was trained to drive a forklift in an industrial setting. And he was at one point institutionalized and thought to be too disabled to ever work.
My
Not
goodness.
only did he work, but it was work with a piece of heavy equipment that has danger and importance to it. So, if you name a position, there's a good chance somebody with a disability has done a job like that. But to
Okay.
help you picture it, I've seen people with disabilities working in state offices with sensitive documents, doing computer data entry. I've seen people run heavy equipment in landscaping and construction operations. Um, Certainly assembly work, working in restaurants. I've seen people with disabilities be exceptionally good caregivers themselves.
I bet they are. Yeah. One of the things that we haven't touched on is one of the things that Garten really specialized in was providing work opportunities for people with disabilities. And so let's talk about what Garten, how you describe that and how you would find that in another community.
Yeah. Well, as the kids were coming out of a summer program, we would get information from the school about what things
Mhm.
they've tried.
Mhm.
And one of the things we try and be is not too literal. So if somebody has worked in an insurance office, does that mean they want to be an insurance agent? Or does
Mhm.
that mean they like working in an office? Or does that mean they like working indoors? Or
Mhm.
does that mean they like working with paper? Or does that mean they like running the photocopier?
Okay.
The only way you can know that is to engage with them about that. And
Mhm.
also, in some cases, you can ask. In some cases, people are nonverbal, so you can observe.
Okay.
One of the things we've done is what we call choice training. If somebody can't tell you, you can look at how they act in the workplace and make notes about that, right?
Mhm.
So, or do they seem to be sick every morning that it happens to be the day that they're going on the landscaping job?
They don't like landscaping.
Sometimes behavior tells you, right?
Uh-huh.
But if they're at that photocopier and they don't seem to ever want to leave the photocopier and they're smiling like crazy while they're photocopying, chances are they like photocopying, right? And
Yeah.
so that could be an insurance office, it could be in a state office, it could be in a copy business.
Mhm.
Uh, so a lot of that choice training is learning what works for the individual, what lights them
Mm-hmm.
up, what seems to be a good match.
Mm-hmm.
Um, one of my philosophies is you can spend a lot of energy trying to squeeze a round peg into a square hole.
Yeah, it's just not going to work.
You can do a lot better and be a lot more successful if you can find a round hole for that round peg.
Yeah,
And
that's right.
it's funny how people succeed when you give them the right opportunity.
Yeah, that's true. So there's you have at Garton, there were several divisions that provided employment opportunities. So I know that you had mass mailing services.
Right.
Yeah, can you explain some of the other programs?
So before I do, let me talk about mass mailing. When I started in this field, people with disabilities were thought to be able to hand sort mail. And that was one of the jobs that we could
Hmm.
figure out how to make available and that they could do. Um, well, mail is not hand sorted in today's world. It's
Mm-hmm.
automated like most things that were
Mm-hmm.
handed out before. And so Garton had to upgrade their mail business with high speed equipment that
Mm-hmm.
automatically prints, stuffs, addresses, and sorts the envelope. Does that mean that people with disabilities can no longer work there? No. It means that we can help them learn how to run a machine. And
Uh-huh.
so manual labor is not the only thing somebody with a disability can do.
Mm-hmm.
When I left Garton, there was a young woman that originally was in a program, was in a school program that wasn't a regular employee. She was a trainee. We were looking for a job for her. She tried out some work in our mailroom. She was successful in doing some of the hand work that was required. Well, now she's running the mailing machine, which processes up to 30,000 pieces an hour.
Whoa, an hour.
That's right. So that's
Wow.
the mailing business. And
Yeah.
it's not a stereotypical role for somebody with a disability. It's operating equipment that is run by a computer. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but we also had custodial work that we did in
Mm-hmm.
many offices, including state offices, the federal courthouse in Eugene, and various places. We had a custodial business. Excuse me. We also had a landscaping business. We had a large recycling business.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of the places where we had a forklift training program where people could actually learn to operate a forklift safely in a busy
Mm-hmm.
industrial environment, but there was staff support available while that learning occurred. So
Yes.
then that individual eventually could work their way into a job outside of Garton safely and not need that level of support and supervision.
Now, was that always the goal, or was the goal to provide employment opportunities for people at Garton and then, graduate out, or they can just stay there and have a career at Garton?
Really insightful question. It was both for us. Different
Okay.
organizations have different philosophies and
Okay.
practices around that. Ours was we have a workforce that employs both people with and without disabilities working side
Okay.
by side. And if somebody wants to work for us and they have a disability and they can do the work, we would be happy to hire them. We'd be delighted to hire them.
Uh-huh.
But we
Uh-huh.
don't want to trap them there. Um,
Yes.
Everybody wants to grow in their job. And if growing looks like moving to a different kind of job with a different organization, we would help them do that as well.
Isn't that fantastic? I remember one story you told about a young man who was so happy to have money because he wanted to help his mother.
Yeah.
Do you remember that story? Do you know which one I'm talking about?
Yeah, I don't tell it that much because it chokes me up, Elaine.
I
it
want
was,
you to
it was,
tell it.
it was a
It's
very
okay if we
young man.
cry. Yeah.
He had pretty significant disabilities, including autism, and he was in the summer program.
Hmm.
And I used to interview the kids toward the end of the program to hear from them what they learned and what they got out of it. And sometimes I'd ask them if there was something special they were saving money for, because in many situations, this is the first job they ever had where they've earned any kind of pay.
Hmm.
And kids are all over the board. I had one kid tell me he was going to save it for cigarettes. That wasn't so inspirational. But the point is, he had spending money for the first time in his life, and he could do what he
Yeah,
wanted with it, even though I
right,
may not agree with his choice. It's his choice. This
right.
young man, though, very intently said that his mom had been a teacher and she had lost her job, and there was illness in the family. I think she became ill and was not able to return to work. And he said that he liked the summer program because he could help out the family.
Hmm.
And he was 19 years old. He
Yeah,
was still in school, and
yeah,
he was feeling sad that his family needed his help and proud that he could help.
yeah,
Instead of being the recipient, he
yeah.
was the giver of the care.
I remember talking about this and saying, probably for the first time in his life, he felt like a real man. That he was the one that was helping care for others, and it's just always really touched my heart and made us, really proud to be, a part of Garton, a very small part, but just, supporting it and listening to the stories and seeing the growth of people and the excitement that they have with having that independence and having their own money.
Right.
Um, so there are some other things that aren't quite so fun, and can be challenging. It can be frustrating that you can get on a list for services and there can be a long waiting list. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah. One of the main changes as your child and you with them move toward adult services out of the
Mhm.
school system, there is no longer an entitlement to services.
Uh-huh.
And so there's a law that says kids through the age of 21 are entitled to services through the school districts, and that's a legal requirement and will be enforced. However, once you become post 21, services are or are not available more or less on a state by state or even region by region basis. Services
Mm.
that are available often have waiting lists, and again, it varies widely. Oregon used to have a huge waiting list, and then there was a lawsuit that said that people were being denied access to the least restrictive environment because they were stuck on waiting lists. And eventually, Oregon got rid of their waiting list
Mm.
with, in some cases, imperfect solutions, but something better than just waiting. So waiting lists are a reality of adult services, and what you can do about that is be a good advocate. Um, you don't want to be the annoying, well, maybe you want to be slightly annoying,
Mhm. Mhm.
but you want to be friendly, you want to be polite. But what you can do around the waiting list, first thing is start early. If you can put your child on a waiting list and they're going to want a service as an adult, find out how early you can put their name on the list. And that usually, again, comes through your county Developmental Disabilities program and the case manager or service coordinator that you're working with.
So Tim, I need to ask you, what kind of a list do you want to go on? What should you be asking for?
The two main waiting lists are typically residential services and work-related or vocational services.
Okay.
And residential services, in some cases, may be even more limited in terms of waiting because it's a home and you either have to build one or somebody has to leave to vacate a place.
Mhm.
And so there's a fixed amount of opportunities available. Now, group homes open and expand, but
Mhm.
generally the fastest way to get into a residential service is for somebody to leave an opening, either by moving out of that service, and
Mhm.
sometimes they die actually and leave an opening. And
Mhm.
so you can check in if you're on a waiting list, but you're not hearing anything. I would encourage you to check in with your service coordinator
Mhm.
regularly.
Mhm.
Not every day, not every week, because things don't move that fast, but maybe once a month, at least every couple of months. Let them know you're still interested. Again, the squeaky wheel is going to get attention. It's not perfect that the system works that way, but most things in life work that way, in my experience.
So if your child is in the high school program, they turn 21, they're still living at home, but they want to go into the residential program, then does the school transfer this individual's records to social services then?
Yes.
And that's how
There's there's
okay.
a formal process for that to
Okay.
protect your confidentiality and the
Okay.
individual's confidentiality. But once the permission is released for the school to share that, which is something you want to do, that's a really good thing that you brought up, because one of the things I was going to tell you to do if you're on a waiting list is have your ducks in a row. So have your eligibility information, your documentation in order, so that that doesn't become the holdup.
Got it.
So one of the things is to sign the release to have that information shared from the school. Now at least there's some information that puts your kid on the radar. If you can do an introduction, if you can have your child or your family meet the caseworker, or if there's an adult program service provider in your area and you have the opportunity to attend an open house or inquire with them, let them know you have an individual with a child with disabilities that might be a future customer of theirs. Now you're a human being. Now you're a real person they can picture instead of a name on a waiting list. And we tend to work harder for real people than names on a
We
waiting list.
do, don't we? Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
those are things that can help you with that.
Okay. So that one was, we talked about the waiting list for residential services. What was the next one?
It's the same process for vocational.
Okay.
It would be the same requirements. It's just a separate waiting list because it's often provided by a different entity.
Okay.
Some organizations, some not-for-profits, do both residential and vocational. Some do just one or the other.
Okay.
And,
Okay.
it really is just a matter of their preference and which organization you would like to work with.
Okay. So the important thing is to know that those services continue just in a different setting, and that then you have to be really proactive once they get out of this school environment and just stay on top of it.
Right.
Reach out to them early and consistently is what I'm hearing.
Right. But they don't have to admit your child to services. There is no requirement.
Oh.
It is not an entitlement. And that's a shock to parents. And that's why I keep emphasizing it. It's not the best thing for people to hear, but you're used to a school system that must provide you with that service. And that legal responsibility does not exist at the adult level. So just know that. Now, having said that, Garton's an example of an organization that was formed for that purpose. It was formed to serve people with disabilities. So there's organizations out there that want to provide those services. It's not like they're looking to exclude you.
Right.
But that's why you may end up on a waiting list, because somebody else's child also wants those services, and they probably have limited funding and limited capacity to do that.
Got it. So what is the kind of the title of a company like Garton Services? Is it, how do you describe it if you were looking for one?
Sure. A vocational service provider.
A vocational service provider. Okay,
Right.
that's important to know. Because if you're looking for that, then that can lead you down the right rabbit hole, right?
And the system, including the adult service system for people with disabilities, I had a line in an outline I did that said, does it seem really complicated? Is it really confusing? Is it frustrating? Absolutely. It's not just you. It really is.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry. I've done what I can to try and make that easier for people.
Yeah.
But you have to educate yourself and you have to learn. Most of the moms I talk about can't get the name of the agency right, or don't necessarily know where it fits in the service system. They know the person that took care of them. They know the person that helped. And
Okay.
so I was talking to somebody. I said, "What's been helpful to you?" They named the name of an individual that was extremely helpful. They didn't care much what organization she was
Okay.
associated with.
Okay.
They just know this is the person that got my child what they needed. But to find that person, you're going to have to understand that structure a little bit.
Yeah. You may
And
have to get shuffled around a little bit.
that's right.
Yeah.
Again, the service coordinator or case manager through the county is
Mhm.
usually knowledgeable about those resources and
Mhm.
is your gatekeeper. That's the
Mhm.
person that can help you figure that out.
Mhm. That's good to know. You made a note that we should talk about legal guardianship.
Yeah, I don't think it's commonly understood um, that a parent is not automatically your legal guardian.
Oh, sure.
And so, especially when you have a child with cognitive disabilities, you've done a whole bunch of your life and their life making decisions and providing care and support
Mhm.
and are very intimately involved in all of that. But once your child reaches the age of majority, which for pretty much everything is age 21, if not
Mhm.
sooner,
Mhm.
they are technically an adult who can make their own decisions and they can decide something different than mom and dad want. That's a good thing in the sense that they're an
Yeah.
adult and they are
Right.
responsible for their own decisions. Um, with a child with real significant disabilities, that may not be practical, and they may need somebody to take that responsibility.
Mhm.
Um, so, legal guardianship is not something to be taken lightly. It takes away rights.
Mhm.
Um, and legal guardianship is different than parental rights. Legal guardianship is a court process that you must go through, and you have to have the individual, your child in this case, adjudicated incompetent. So, in
Mhm.
essence, the court has to determine that they are incapable of acting on their own behalf and then give that responsibility to you or the designated
Mhm.
person. As an adult, that matters more and more, partly because you want your child to be responsible for themselves and you're not going to be there to guard them forever either.
Right.
But it also comes into service decisions. Um, if I'm your
Um,
vocational service provider and your kid says he wants to work at a gas station and you say, I don't want him to work at a gas station, I'm going to try and work with you and your child to negotiate that.
mhm.
Because if you're against it, you may
Mhm.
not be providing the positive input that would help that
Mhm.
child be successful. Or maybe they still rely on you for a ride to work. And if you
Mhm.
don't want to take them to work, that's going to be a problem, right? Um,
Mhm.
but ultimately, I act on behalf of the person who's in charge, and that's the individual. And so if mom doesn't want it and the individual does, the individual really gets to decide.
But if they have guardianship,
If the parent
that
is the legal guardian, then um, I'm trying to think of a real example. If there's a decision, let's say there's an issue with medications,
okay.
and we've seen what seems to be a bad reaction to a medication change.
Mhm.
I need to talk to the parent about that because the parent is the legal guardian and ultimately has the authority to make that decision and the control of that decision. And the child does not. Now, you can have a parent who says, talk to my child as though you're talking to me. And
Mhm.
that's wonderful because
Mhm.
everybody's on the same page. But ultimately, you know, the parent is the legal guardian. Right down to the point is if I had a success story, I had a young woman working in one of Garton's businesses, and she did really well, and she was really proud. And somebody saw
Mhm.
some remarkable accomplishment, and they wanted to publish that. I would have to ask the legal guardian's permission to do that. The
Mhm.
individual might love being in the newspaper or on TV, but their confidential information about them having a disability, their legal guardian is the one that decides whether I get to release that or not. Does that make
So
sense?
it's an interesting conundrum, isn't it? It's like you would want the guardianship to protect them. And at the same time, it takes away their um, their individuality or,
Right.
their own capacity to make decisions for themselves.
Right.
That's a tricky balance.
It's not, I will say it's not very common for people to not be their own legal guardian. So the
Okay.
exception is that you adjudicate them incompetent and take
Okay.
over formal guardianship.
Okay.
However, that does occur, especially when the individual doesn't speak for themselves.
Yes.
But even nonverbal people can express choice.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's not common, but it can be done and it will be respected by all legal entities because it is a court document that says this is the way it is. You treat the parent as though they're speaking for the individual. That
So
goes
now, is
into
that different? When we talk about end of life ducks in a row, we talk about if a person becomes incapacitated and they cannot make, competent decisions on their own behalf, then you would have a conservator who manages the money, and a guardian would manage the health care, kind
yeah,
of the
and
physical aspect
the legal guardian would have authority over all of that.
over it.
And they
Okay.
could choose to divide it up differently. So there could
Okay.
be a certain end of life arrangement or a
Okay.
medical arrangement that somebody else is given that responsibility or
Mm-hmm.
authority.
Mm-hmm.
But generally, it would be the legal guardian,
Mm-hmm.
and that
Well,
supersedes that choice. Actually,
sure, sure. That gets complicated, doesn't it?
it does. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a common mistake for people to assume that the parent is the legal guardian of the individual, and
Yes.
that is not the case.
Well, and another note that you had made, it's also not a good assumption to think that, okay, if I'm the mother and the mother and the dad die, that one of our other children who is not developmentally disabled will take over their care.
Right.
That is a really huge expectation.
Well, you touch on a really big area there, and I'm glad you did that. The family is involved with the disability pretty
Mhm,
much no matter what. I mean,
mhm,
if you've lived in the same house, or even if you're just connected to the family members,
mhm,
you're engaged in the disability in one way or another.
mhm.
And sibling roles are challenging for parents to figure out. First
Sure.
off, don't assume that your sibling is in this separate box where you're going to keep them unaffected and this shouldn't be their problem because that's
Mhm,
just not realistic.
mhm.
And secondly, it's not all a problem. It's an opportunity. It's part of life.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
joy. It's sadness. It's love. It's all
yeah,
of those things in your family, and
yeah.
you're all going to be a part of that. But um, as you start to realize that you're not going to be around forever and you want to make sure that there are provisions made for the support that your child with disabilities needs, you
Mhm,
have to think about siblings and where they fit in that. There are
mhm.
some siblings that would just be offended and would be adamant that you not transfer that responsibility to somebody else. I'll be
Yeah,
there. John's my brother. I love him.
right, right.
I will fill the role that you filled, Mom.
Mhm,
And that's wonderful if that works for that
mhm.
family and the individual themselves. Now, you might find a case where the child with disabilities doesn't want that sibling to be in that role.
Oh, I hadn't
You
thought
have to
about
think
that.
about that
Yeah,
too.
yeah,
But
yeah.
don't assume that the siblings won't play a role, but I think it's also not fair to assume that they will.
Hmm.
I've heard
But
parents,
these are,
yeah, I've heard
yeah, go
parents
ahead.
say many times, I don't really want that burden to fall on the sister.
Hmm. Hmm.
And whether the sister sees it as a burden or not, the parent sees it as something that isn't fair. I
Hmm.
took on this responsibility. I'm not going to pass it on to them.
Right. It's important to have those conversations before there's a crisis.
That's exactly right, Elaine. That's
Hmm.
exactly what I was going to say. Have the
Yeah,
conversation, sort it out,
yeah.
give the sibling a chance to say how they feel about it, give the individual with disabilities a chance, um,
Hmm.
and then figure it out together.
Hmm. One thing that you keep bringing up that I think is really important is to not assume that you need to make all of the decisions for them. you need to respect their ability to understand what is important to them, what they like, what they don't like, and to give them the ability and the authority to make decisions for themselves.
Isn't that ultimately what we want for all our kids?
It is. It is. And, it's with some kids, it's easier than with others. And I think we have to accept that regardless of our children's abilities, that we have to accept that they are individuals and they are going to have likes and dislikes and passions that are different from ours, and goals and dreams and all of that. So giving them, as you said when we started this, that your daughter's 25 years old and she's perfectly healthy and capable, and you still would like for her to follow your advice. It's not easy. It's not easy, but we have to accept that they are capable of knowing what's important to them. And I think that's really good.
Well,
Um,
even when they aren't, Elaine, there's to take that away
yes,
takes away something really precious, right? It takes away
it does.
self-confidence, it takes away self-esteem,
Hmm.
and even, making a mistake, you got to
Mhm.
make it yourself and you got to learn from it. And
Mhm.
so there's something about that. You see that other people are doing those things, you want to be that kind of person too. And
Yeah.
so um, people with disabilities that I know feel great when they make a decision and they follow it through and it becomes what they want it to be. And it's an experience
Yeah.
I think we want for them.
Yeah, of course it is. That's great. What do we need to talk about now? We're looking at this, and I have notes here about resources, SSI, residential living support, work training, employment.
Yeah, a couple
Um,
of things I can add that we haven't covered that I think are important. One is that we talked about residential and work, and
mhm,
back to people making their own choices and having their own legal authority to do so.
mhm,
Um, if you're a person with a disability, at least in today's world, you can choose not to work too. And to some extent, we have that choice, but you have to figure out how to live.
mhm,
We're talking about situations where maybe there are support resources like SSI that actually are covering most of the living expenses for somebody
mhm,
with a severe disability. And either they may have no interest in work, or work may not be something that they're able to find
mhm,
or
mhm,
get a job that will
mhm,
sustain them.
mhm.
And so there are services, they're generally called day activity services or day
Yes,
support services.
yes.
And that is a service that can help provide meaningful activity, community engagement, and things of that nature for an individual with disabilities who either isn't ready to enter the world of work or doesn't wish to.
Mhm. Oh, I had forgotten about that. And so tell me what happens in those environments then.
Some programs do that and can do it in conjunction with a work program.
Mhm,
So maybe you have physical disabilities that mean you can only work a couple hours a day, but you're
mhm,
bored sitting at home the rest of that time.
mhm,
So you would go to an activity program that might go on trips or do activities, anything from crafts to volunteer
mhm.
activities, basically non work related activities that are not geared around pay.
And how is that paid for?
That also is typically funded through Medicaid funding from the
Mhm,
federal government, through the state, and then through
mhm.
the county.
That would have to be a wonderful outlet for parents and for the young person or whatever age they are, so that they aren't stranded at home alone with no social engagement, with no activity, with no stimulation. That's I think it's a wonderful thing that you can offer. Okay, Tim, I want to ask you now, and I haven't given you any time to think about this, but when you reflect back on the 40 plus years that you have spent working with and supporting people with disabilities, what is the most memorable or important thing for you when you think about your career? How did this impact you, and how did you feel about the work and the people that you worked with?
Wow. Um, it's inspirational, actually.
Yeah.
I first off, I've met so many individuals with disabilities with so many different traits and strengths and characteristics. Um, and I don't want to misstate this, but people with disabilities sometimes are less concerned about how they present or what other people think, and it's wonderful because you get who they really are.
Yeah.
In many cases, unfiltered, and there's people that have a great sense of humor. There's people that tease you. I mean, I've just had so many wonderful, rich relationships that I never would have had if I didn't take that first step to get to know people with disabilities better.
Uh-huh.
Um, but my work, why I really liked it, is that I always felt that my efforts were going toward people who deserved my efforts. They
Oh,
did
that's
nothing wrong.
wonderful. Yeah.
They just happen to have a disability, and they really appreciate the opportunities that they're given. And so I can remember driving to work and seeing a guy with a bad leg in a snowstorm walking 2 miles from his house to work when other people were calling in because the driving was too bad,
Yeah.
just dragging that leg with a big smile on his face all the way to work.
Yeah.
Now, not everybody's going to smile in a snowstorm, whether they have a disability or not. But how
Right.
could I complain about my workday after watching that guy do that for an entry level job at not really high pay? Um, I'll close with probably the story that's lit me up the most, and there's a ton of them I could tell you.
Mhm.
But a young man named Jacob came into our program, and Jacob was young and he was extremely active, might have been described as hyperactive at some
Mhm.
point. And he can't talk. He's pretty physically able, but he's a blooming, buzzing mass of confusion. I don't know how else to say it. I don't mean to step on his dignity, but his hands are moving and he's making sounds and they don't seem to relate to what's going on around him. And you don't see capability the first time you meet Jacob.
Mhm.
And we had Jacob try out different jobs and different work situations that we could provide. And some of them he didn't do very well. And he just looked like the same Jacob that I described to you a minute ago.
Yeah.
And then we found a job that required a lot of movement. And it was
Oh.
actually sorting recyclables on an industrial belt. It was a
Uh-huh.
high speed job that not everybody can do.
Uh-huh.
In fact, I get vertigo if I tried it, some kinds of fundraising things to be,
Right.
okay, let's have the CEO work on the sort belt. And
Yeah.
I can make it for a while, but eventually I get dizzy and I'm going to throw up at some point if I keep doing it. But I hadn't seen Jacob work on the belt till one day I was doing a tour, and there was Jacob on the belt, and his hands were flying.
Yeah.
And they were flying sorting recyclables the whole time. He was faster than the person without disabilities doing the job, and he was grinning up a storm. And all I could think of is, way to go, Jacob.
Yeah.
And it hit me how much of his life he must have been told to be quiet,
Yeah.
stop, sit
Stop.
down, and all of that negative feedback he got his whole life by things that he can't control because his body doesn't do what he asks it to
Mhm.
do.
Mhm.
Finally, we found something that he could do better than most anybody else. And the
Mhm.
pride that I saw from that young man will stay with me my whole life.
Oh, I love that. That's a wonderful story. And I love what you said about I got to work in a job that helped people who deserved it. That's a beautiful thing to say. Thank you. And I know that even though you are no longer the CEO of Garten Services, your knowledge, your experience, and your love and compassion for people, it's going to keep making a difference in the world for others. So thank you for being our guest and for being my friend. I'm proud to call you my friend. So thank you, and we may be back with more. And again, Tim's contact information is in the comments. So thank you, Tim.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity, Elaine. I really enjoyed it.
I did too. It was great. And I learned so much. We'll see you later. Bye bye.
Bye now.